Wayne's World, party time. Excellent.
Party on, Charles.
Party on, dude.
Oops, I forgot to knock this thing out of the way, so people just lost us behind the picture of you. But welcome to Slick Willie's world.
It is yet again a triumph of the art department there, and pretty tough to argue that there's a close DNA relationship between Bill Clinton and Chelsea, looking at these two pictures.
Everyone is seeing them and talking about Buell Hubble, or what's the guy's name?
Webster Hubble.
Webster Hubble, right. Yeah.
Should have been called Hubble's World.
Hubble's World. We have to get the telescope involved at that point. But I have to admit, Charles, I'm a little confused why this is the movie for today. What are we going to be discussing?
Well, this is, we're going to be talking about the excellent globalist world that Slick Willie and his people have created for themselves.
Excellent.
Where they could, sit in the equivalent of their parents' basement with making really bad music and arguing that all these schemes they're doing are benefiting the vulnerable people around the world, when in reality what they're doing is skiving off as much money as they can to line their pockets, to reward their donors, to persecute their enemies. It's a slick world they live in. And people are prone, and I think rightfully prone, to giving Bill and giving Hillary a lot of guff. But to date, we really haven't come down hard on Chelsea.
Right.
And we cut her a tremendous amount of slack. This is not Sasha and Malia Obama. This is, a woman who's, I think, in her late 30s at this point, the mother of 3 children. She has multiple degrees from pretty good places: Stanford, Oxford, Columbia, PhD.
I don't know about Oxford.
Yeah, but we gave her a chance many episodes ago to listen. If you'll come forward and level with us that you got involved with this scheme, you had no idea how desperately horrible the Clinton Foundation had become under the leadership of Bill and Hillary and Bruce Lindsay and Terry McAuliffe and the like, we would have cut her some slack. It's not an easy thing to do, to wake up at age 25 or whenever it would have been and realize, hey, my parents are straight up stone cold criminals. And I didn't think they were. I knew I was trained from a young age. The true story is that Bill and Hillary, when she was very young, supposedly would take Chelsea aside as a child and say, "You're going to hear these horrible stories about us. They're made up by enemies of your father or your mother, and you can't believe what you hear." And she's probably saying to little Chelsea, "It's all going to be fake news."
That term hadn't even been invented yet. Charles, you said that people are prone to do something with the Clintons. Anybody who goes against them is also winding up prone.
Exactly. Well, in the past. But so Chelsea has basically milked the Clinton Foundation and milked her parents' crooked relationships now for well over 10, 15, 20 years of adulthood or near adulthood. And she's living as a multimillionairess, maybe more than that. She's got all these sinecures, all these fancy...
She doesn't care about money.
Exactly, of course.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere.
Why bother? I don't even care. It's all around.
I go to the charity and I show up. I've got my chief of staff at a charity. How does Chelsea Clinton, as the vice chair of a charity, have a chief of staff? How is that justified at all?
How old was she when they left the White House? She was still kind of a kid, right?
She was born, I looked this up, she was born in 1980, so she was almost 21, I forget when her birthday is, but almost 21 years old, still at Stanford. And during that time frame, she wouldn't have really known the particulars, and she would have been quite involved in high school and college and growing up, or trying to grow up. But that's all well and good. Now we are 19 years after that, and she doesn't have the "I'm just a kid" excuse anymore.
No, definitely not.
So I thought that what we might do here, we're going to dive in some depth to go through the early origins of the Clinton Foundation again, and then we're also going to tackle this Ukraine issue.
Yeah.
Because that's really very much
It's amazing how that's popped up and they're like, oh, Trump did it again. He's trying to enforce the law. He's trying to investigate crimes. He must be a Russian agent.
That's right. Everybody knows it. See, it's on CNN.
On a serious note, Charles, you and I had done an interview with, I think Gary Byrne was the guy's name. He was a Secret Service agent who was bringing a lawsuit against the Clintons. And I seem to recall him saying that even as a young child, they had kind of like trained Chelsea to just be awful to the Secret Service agents.
Yeah, I've heard that as well.
I think that was Gary Byrne who told us that. I've been meaning to get back in touch with him and see what's going on with his lawsuit.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine. I mean, I obviously never had a setup with as many people running around any house I lived in who were, butlers and maids and this and that. But I was in a situation for quite a few years where I had at least 2 people at all time in my house, and sometimes more than that. And I could imagine if you're from Arkansas or anywhere and you come to Washington, D.C., and in Arkansas, they never actually lived in a serious home. They lived of their own. They had a cheap house that they bought. Before that, they had a cheap house that they bought. I mean, a really very cheap house.
Right.
Then they move into the Beverly Hill, the Little Rock Hillbillies mansion. and then for the next umpty years, they're living in government housing. But nice government housing, but government housing.
Not like 8th Avenue over here, like the White House.
Right. But you've got all these people who are constantly, they have a duty to protect the president. So when Hillary starts throwing lamps at them, they got to come in and say, you better stop that because that could hurt the president and we'd have to shoot you.
Wow, that would have been awesome.
Apparently it happened. The various and sundry insider books have talked about Hillary having a
throw an ashtray at him or something.
And a lamp, because
she's out of her mind.
Well, she's probably. I mean, who knows? You can't diagnose. I'm not qualified to diagnose her, but she certainly seems to have severe mental issues and other physical issues. So in that environment, if you've got just one kid, you're going to dote on an only child, and you're going to be fearful about who are all these people constantly. You never get any real private time. So I wouldn't ever let a child of mine do that, but I can imagine how Bill and Hillary would let Chelsea turn into an obnoxious boor.
Yeah, well, when you're born of 2 psychopaths, I don't think you got good odds of being something other. Maybe I've discussed this before, but when we went to that What Happened book signing, I had a moment to speak with Hillary Clinton. And the only person whose eyes I've ever looked into that were more lifeless than hers was a friend of mine in college who had gotten into a real serious heroin problem. And I remember I met with him and told him, like, you gotta, and it's just like, something going on there with the eyes. I don't know what.
Yeah. I mean, it's, my kids were dragged down to events in New York City when we lived upstate because there was a mother of one of my kids' classmates was a big supporter of Hillary Clinton. So the whole school would go down to these events and
pull cell phones out of people's hands.
No, and one of them I remember. My kids were very young, and my daughter came up and said, "You're not going to believe what happened. Hillary Clinton kissed William. It was disgusting."
William, your son.
Yeah, exactly. And the 2 of them turned to me and they said, "And Hillary Clinton, she's got gaga eyes. She's crazy."
There's something up when you look in her eyes. It's like, what's wrong with this lady?
Yeah, I feel sorry for the 3 grandchildren. I mean, I mean, as an adult, I mean, you would say you weren't terrified, but you were put off. Can you imagine if? You're not going to believe what happened.
What is that? Why is that happening?
That's strange.
The 2 of them turned to me and they said,
"That's crazy."
Sorry, we're having a brief interlude here.
That should not be happening. What's going on over here, Charles? Please carry on. Sorry about that.
So
random devices start playing the show, even when they're turned off.
All right, good. So anyway, without any further ado, perhaps we should jump into the slides.
Yes.
There's a lot to cover here.
Yes, indeed. Here we are.
So there's this term which I think is really absurd. This, not just simply because I'm white. This idea of white privilege. I mean, and people use it whenever they want to, have an argument against somebody. Oh, you're guilty of white privilege. So let's think about that for a little bit. Different people are good at different things, and would anyone say, Michael Jordan was a bad basketball player?
He was the best ever
because he had black privilege. I mean, it's just an absurd set of arguments, particularly for people like the Clintons to throw around, given that in Bill's case, he came from, let's just put it this way, humble background. Hillary, not so much. Her father was a businessman, a successful businessman.
I thought he was a mobster.
No, he had a small business in Illinois. I don't think he was a mobster, but maybe I could be wrong. But for them to start in very modest means, to end up graduating from all these top schools, off to Yale Law School, and then leaping in to up the food chain very quickly to the point where they are now, multimillionaires, having, quote, led a life of public service. I mean, there's a headline here that if you're going into public service, it should not be a career path that allows you to go from a substantial negative net worth because you can't pay any of your bills. What?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is accurate, but I think this is a website that we've referenced before. It's the highly credible Brass Balls blog.
Yeah, I'm not sure I've heard
Is that
that.
Hillary right there?
Boy.
With the doll?
The doll or the girl?
I don't know, but I've heard this before, that he was involved in organized crime. Oh yeah, look, it says according to Larry Nichols. Maybe that's where I heard it. Well, we'll look into that further. Sorry
I don't know about that, but I do know that Dan Rostenkowski was crooked, and ultimately I think was convicted of something or other, and he was a senior member of the House of Representatives. But anyway, for the Clinton family to go from a negative net worth to now where they are, engaged constantly in these requests for money on behalf of vulnerable people. It starts out in Arkansas at the the raccoon dinner. In wherever that was.
Raccoon Barbecue.
Raccoon Barbecue, where they're raising money for a football team, but they raise gigantic sums relative to the size of the need for the football team, and then they go on and they have the Arkansas Development Finance Authority raise all kinds of money that disappears, and then they go into scheme after scheme after scam after scam, and we fall. Those who care about politics fall for the minute-by-minute refutation of allegations against Donald Trump or allegations against a Republican. And we missed the headline story. The Clintons have been scamming the globe for their entire lives. And, there you go.
Nothing like a furry varmint for dinner.
That's like a step up, right, for what you normally eat.
Ruth Christ's Raccoon House?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I would draw the line at that.
I would try it.
Yeah, and that's what separates you from me. I would not try raccoon meat. No thanks.
It was cool.
But so the Clintons have been doing that. I suppose, if you're Chelsea and you're sitting there and it's like, I don't care about money, and so why should I have to work? I mean, you just saw how my parents did it. There's just money comes in the front door, and we'll just put it over here and over there, and that's what we do.
Take it to the laundry room.
That's right, and I've got my perfect solution. My family will steal the money, and then we'll give it to my husband, who will lose the money, and then we'll steal the money and lose the money. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Right.
But when we think about in time, as we move away from the minute-by-minute tweeting and instant punditry reactions and social justice warriors, lecturing us, and the angry scolds, and I don't know if I should use that expression, RBF, that I mentioned to you in Zero Hedge, the plastic surgeon, and anyway, we'll get to it. But these very angry people who will, want to tell you how to live, They want to have control over everything. You know, America, the world, everything. You can't eat meat. You got to give us all your money. You got the climate. You know, this whole group of people, it's a small group of people who are 100% certain they're absolutely right, and if you disagree with them, you should be shot or go to prison, or you're racist or bigot. This change, I would actually say that it went back perhaps to W. Bush. It certainly took shape under Clinton. And remember, when we talk about W. Bush, you're talking about starting in 1989. So the people who got out of college in 1989, today they are distinguished professors, presidents of colleges, and they're the influence shapers. You know, they're the people around Obama, around Clinton, around W. Bush. They're the people who explain, you know, what the correct way to live is, and then persecute you if you, God forbid, attended a party when you're 17 and nobody really knows what happens.
Cancel culture.
It's ridiculous. So, particularly under Obama, but I would argue also under W. Bush, there was a gross abuse of executive power. Certainly under Bush, you know.
What about H.W. Bush?
I'm not as familiar with exactly what happened under H.W. Bush, and I think we.
Well, let me sum it up for you. Murdered JFK, then, you know, went into the CIA, covered up the whole church committee deal.
Right.
Enron, Iran, Contra, kind of an abuse of power.
Okay, but I'll give you that, and I think, because I've said before, I think that the unregulated globalists, Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike, have waged a more than 30 years war against the working person in this country, and that fact is an undeniable fact. The Clintons and the Obamas, and to even the Bushes, didn't really have that much money in 1989, and today all those families are very, very wealthy, when the average worker is fighting to keep his or her job, fighting to pay the expenses that for college, for education, for basic living. And when you look at the actual pay per hour that you have to work, back in 1989, you did not have to work 60 hours a week, checking your emails at night, checking on the weekend, reading all these things. You didn't have to do any of that. You work 9 to 5, you walk out, and you forget about work. It doesn't bother you.
It was back in the day, if you called someone and they didn't answer, it was like, where on earth are they?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I mean, so it's a very different world now. And in that world, back in 1989, the governments weren't all that powerful. National governments weren't all that powerful, and people laughed at the youth.
Technology wasn't that powerful.
Technology wasn't that powerful, exactly. But now, a very small number of people at the top, monopolists and near monopolists at the tech companies, some of these investment firms, some of these other straight up industrial and service monopolies. Monopolists, I would argue, it's monopolistic behavior at the top academic institutions. They know that there's 20, 30 times the number of applicants for every spot. They know that they have big endowments now, so they don't have to care what the alumni say. And they've got tenure at the top, so nobody can fire them. In the public service unions, same issue. They've got, who's going to disband a public service union? It's probably a good idea to do it, but you're never going to win a national election if you say, if I get elected, I'm going to disband the teachers union, SEIU, and all that. It's never going to work for you. So
SEIU had a big cookie projection at the hotel last night where Andrew McCabe was skulking around, hiding from Michael Moore and myself.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it. So under Obama especially, here we're chirping about whether Donald Trump, the latest outrage, whether Donald Trump may have asked the president of Ukraine to have his people really dive into what actually happened in Ukraine with the corruption that is alleged to have gone on involving that started, I would argue, back in 2003, 2004, if not earlier.
Yeah.
So he gets in trouble for that, and we get distracted for this idea, or temporarily in trouble for the idea that as Cheryl Atkinson has recounted, as many others have recounted, under Barack Obama, the executive branch spied on the Supreme Court, on foreign leaders, on journalists, allies, you name it. They sent guns, some bunch of bozos said, hey, let's we got a gun problem. Let's send a whole bunch of guns into Mexico and see what happens.
What can possibly go wrong?
And they come back into this country, and one of our border agents dies. Let's cover that up. I mean, you go scandal after scandal. You don't need to get into the particulars of Benghazi and the particulars of this, because everyone's eyes glaze over. What actually happened under Obama, and before that under W. Bush, is the executive branch exercised unchecked, unconstitutional power in violation of numerous laws, and our justice system and the IRS and others did nothing. You know, they put Obama up on a pedestal to criticize him. You're a racist if you say he did anything wrong. It's much bigger than what Barack Obama did. It's the executive branch, it's the FBI, it's the CIA, it's this deep state that basically lulled or manipulated public opinion into believing that it's okay to have this fourth branch of power that is unchecked, and you can never find out what they actually did in time to do anything about it, because they say, whoa, national security. Sources and methods will be revealed.
I offer one suggestion as a correction. You're speaking in the past tense, but I think it's still happening, Charles. Because even right now, when you search for Eric Holder, as I was doing, it took me a minute to get to this image, because it's bringing up a million images of this dude who murdered Nipsey Hussle.
Also called Eric Holder?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Art imitates life?
Well, or who knows what. They seem to love these media plays where they just, flood the internet with nonsense. Someone's like, oh yeah, Eric Holder, that guy who killed Nipsey Hussle. That's all they think about.
But, the bigger story, the headline under this period, is that the executive branch tapped into powers that it should not have used, and used those powers to reward cronies. You think about the various and sundry no-bid contracts. You think about the stimulus. Nobody checked to see what happened to the money. You think about the no inspector general at the State Department, or Defense Department. $8 billion goes missing in Iraq. We give $150 billion to Iran. Nobody seems to care about it. And Barack Obama and Michelle Obama follow in the footsteps of Laura and George Bush. They make even more money than Laura and George Bush with their gigantic book deal and their Netflix deal and then their expensive vacations somebody else is paying for. None of that stuff should happen. And and I would note that if it's okay, if we set the precedent, it's okay for a president of the United States to have a, quote, library complex built at the expense of donors, and then on a subsidized basis, because it's a charity, at the expense of the federal and state and foreign taxpayers, if it's to house everything in their lives that they did up through and after. We're going to have to build a new city for the Trump Presidential Library. I mean, this man's got, I don't know how many golf courses and how many, buildings. Think of the records that he has going back to birth.
The guy doesn't want to go to, self-storage. That's like $300 a month. Put it in the library.
A library. So you say, how big a library do we need? Well, how about something about the size of Los Angeles? I mean, you're going to need a gigantic, bunch of buildings, and who's going to pay for that? And the whole idea of these presidential centers was never to do that, to have it be a repository for all of your personal stuff.
When did they start that with the presidential
1955.
Really?
The Presidential Libraries Act.
Who was the first presidential library?
I don't know if it was Truman, but they had some libraries beforehand, but the Presidential Libraries Act was enacted in 1955.
And
the first
mandates
time. But it was always to handle the records. There's a defined term.
Golf club, restaurant, strip club.
No.
Oh.
Presidential records are records of various types. Electronic media were contemplated. Actually, it was the act was codified in 1978 because there was a debate in the Nixon presidency under whether his papers were public records or not. And they had to litigate it out, and ultimately they had to pass a new law, the Presidential Records Act of 1978. And it's records of various types, paper, electronic, and other, that were either created or received narrowly during a president's term in office. So it's just for the 8 years. That's what you're supposed to store. And the reason to give it tax exemption was that the National Archives wouldn't then have to bear the expense of housing all these massive records. It wasn't, the idea that Barack Obama's tried on the world, that his library isn't going to hold any of the records. It's just going to copy them, and for that, he should be able to desecrate a protected portion of Little Rock, of Chicago
Park, and not hire any of the homeless people around there. One guy told me he was upset about that.
Right. Well, but actually, that park and that neighborhood is, what do you call it? It's on the National Register of Historic Places. Supposedly, you're not supposed to do what he's doing.
Anymore.
Exactly. and it's not even going to hold the records. It's absurd on its face, but it's of course Chicago, and people do what they want to do in Chicago when they're not shooting each other up.
Well, and also, some of the people around that neighborhood, Charles, were concerned that it was going to drive the cost up and they're going to have to find a new place to live, and they were very worried about that.
Right. So when we think again about this period, and it really does go back before Obama, the people who are resisting Trump, the never-Trumpers, really don't have an option. They've got to hope that Trump loses, because if he wins, they're going to prison. They're going to prison for a long time. And it's not just going to be McCabe or Comey. It's going to go up the food chain, very high.
You're right.
I think. Well, I'm not certain, but I'm close to certain that that's what's going to happen.
I really hope that's true.
So with that, maybe we should.
People are saying Nipsey Hussle was a psyop. I don't know enough about that.
So you continue to get more viewers, I know, and I get more followers on Twitter. And for those joining us the first time on this show, this is a different approach to interacting with a growing crowd of people around the world. I was up I won't say exactly where, but I was up in a small town in Massachusetts during the week, and this guy walked up to me several times actually, and a very nice person, and said, "Oh, I'm a loyal viewer of your show. Have you moved to this small town?" I said, No, just visiting. But the approach here is to communicate, as we do, with a large number of people. This is I think, our 177th two-hour show. And Jason has put together this excellent playlist. Just the index of all the shows we've done has more than 25,000 views.
Yeah.
And some people would be very happy with a view count like that on one podcast episode. But we're building a body of work here that is, I think, useful in many respects, because each one of these presentations is dated. We have a number of viewers. We have a lot of information on each show. We can look at the metrics. But beyond that, behind each of these shows is a set of slides that you can pull down. And they're available free of charge. And you can go, people like to say to me, when they want to try to bait me on Twitter or whatever, they say, "Well, you never say anything in detail." I say, "You clearly have not watched a single episode,
right.
So you're blocked." But when you look at these different, what's
666 likes. So we should get on this episode and like it. Yeah. I was just going to demonstrate how people can access.
That's a great idea. Why don't you go ahead?
Presentation. Very often you're going to need to click on this little grayed out show more, and that brings up this link to the PDF presentation that people can download, follow along, print out, archive.
And what these links allow you to do is get behind. We'll talk about something, and we'll say, to take a look at this link, and you click on it, and you can read it. So what we try to do is go on a deeper dive through each episode's topic, and then provide you, the audience, with the ability to see what we're talking about. If you want to spend more time on it, you can go read the links, you can think about it, and as you get to understand what we're trying to do, and you follow what we're trying to do, you can really help us by saying to just one skeptic or one friend, "Hey, have you watched any of these shows? You ought to take a look at the most recent show, and if you like it, you may want to book a hotel room somewhere in Hawaii or whatever, and when it's hot outside, you can watch 4 or 5 hours of the show and come back in a month, and you'll learn all."
Why do that in Hawaii?
Well, because it's hot during the day, so that's when you can come inside your nice air-conditioned cabana, and you can watch Sunday with Charles for 4 or 5, 6 hours a day. When morning you walk along the beach, evening you have a nice dinner, go to sleep, rinse and repeat.
People can also listen to it on their phone, in the car, on the drive to work, on the subway or whatever. And for a lot of it, Charles, people tell me that they listen because it's mostly the spoken word. Of course, the imagery helps people connect, and reading the slides when they want to go real in depth. But it's a lot of material, and people, maybe while you're at the gym or something.
Good. Well, we just appreciate the viewership and the support, and thanks to all of you who have been so helpful with ideas, with constructive criticism. You can reach me through my site. You can follow me on Twitter and follow Jason on Twitter. Send us direct messages if you have specific concerns on Twitter or ideas on Twitter. If you send me an email, please don't send me more than 200 words, because that's about what I'll read in the first email. Some people are prone to sending me 25-page emails, and I'm not going to read something like that in the very beginning because I'm extremely busy during the week. But as I get to know somebody, that's a different story. Then I'm quite happy to get. There's several people I'm working with who will send me 300-page presentations that I'm very interested in reading.
Wow.
But
you read very quickly, I have to say.
Well, it's the benefit of being artistically and musically challenged is that the portions of your brain that might require you to understand how to do something artistically or musically, you can use those to read more quickly. That's basically how it works for me. So why don't we jump into the latest news? And really, I had difficulty limiting this page to the number. There's so much going on. But instantly, it was a coordinated assault. The Clintons are not smart enough, I think, or maybe they're too arrogant at this point. Here's Hillary Clinton quoted in, I guess this is Friday in the afternoon, so very quickly. Trump has asked a foreign power to help him win an election again. I mean, what kind of a bonehead is Hillary Clinton, honestly, at this point? Yeah. To think that anybody
Joe Biden's going to do anything but bleed out the eye.
Right. To really think that the American public in 2019 and 2020 and the Democrats, the progressive Democrats, are dumb enough to allow Hillary Clinton to be the king or queen maker of the 2020 election and be like, remember what Dick Cheney did under George W. Bush. George W. Bush, I guess when he was selected, or he won enough primaries to be the nominee, he appointed Dick Cheney to be the person to select the vice president. And Cheney did his work and came back and said, I think the best person for the job is me. And that's Hillary Clinton. I think 2020, I've thought about the field. Of course, I admire Joe Biden when he's not sleeping or leaving his hands off of people. And she's sitting here on the sidelines, I think fully prepared in her mind to swoop in the last minute and say, all this, we can't have a fake Indian, we can't have a has-been Bernie, we can't have Yang with his free money approach to life. None of this is going to work. The only person who's left to save the day is me, Hillary Clinton. I bet you she tries.
That would be amazing. I mean, people do not like Hillary Clinton, and she doesn't seem able to grasp that. It's funny, what you're saying, Charles, is essentially the same exact thing they've done to Chelsea. It's an indoctrination. I mean, we see this, obviously it's fictional character, but in The Sopranos, Tony Soprano's kids they think he's a nice guy. They have no idea. So there's some, You
don't mean the kid. What? No freaking ziti?
But they don't think their father is a criminal. They just think he's a nice guy who works in the garbage business. So, Hillary Clinton thinks her father's president. Of course they're rich.
Yeah.
Can go pretty far,
But remember, she's the second smartest woman in the world after her mother.
I don't think so.
Chelsea.
I would doubt that.
Now, this fellow, I think this is a story by Patrick Howley, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know if you can scroll down the page here at all.
Sorry.
Yeah. Patrick Howley is a guy who's wrote for the Daily Caller. He had his own thing for a while, big league politics, and evidently now he's at the Epoch Times. And this fellow, Buzz Patterson, you were talking about Larry Nichols, who in the governor days was hanging around Bill Clinton. But Buzz was in the White House when Bill Clinton was president. And the original story that came out that got all the airwaves and all the attention was that some national security pro had filed a whistleblower complaint against President Trump for what he may have done and what in conversations with a foreign leader. Now it turns out, first of all, for this person to file the complaint was ridiculous, but it turns out that this person may have had no first-person knowledge of what Trump was saying on the phone to the person in Ukraine. And Buzz Patterson makes the point here that this is just so far outside what somebody in the National Security Division should be doing in the first place. I mean, it's not like we have, the Stasi, or maybe it is like we have the Stasi in the United States, where you have the illusion that people are actually have power in the House and the Senate and the executive branch and judiciary, but it's the Stasi who call the shots, and they listen into everything, and if they don't like the direction of the way the president's conducting foreign policy, well, they're just going to start a war or some kind of thing that'll distract public attention, have the media, fake news media, pour into it and blast the president into smithereens, and if he doesn't get the message after a few times, literally take him out. I mean, that is not what we signed up for in this country, but it may be what Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton think they signed up for.
Charles, I think a lot of people, including me, wait for Sunday to get the Charles explanation of all this stuff that makes us totally crazy. Help me understand this Ukraine thing, because as I see it, it's the President of the United States calling the President of another country and saying, hey, information has come to light that the previous Vice President may have been doing something massively illegal with his son in your country. Has this been investigated? What at all is wrong with that?
There's nothing wrong with that. And actually, the focus of the show is going to be on the earlier than that period in Ukraine. Ukraine has been, I first went to Ukraine in 2010 in April. And I think I've been there 15 times.
Wow.
And for different reasons in the course of 3 years. And I've been all over that country. Odessa, Kiev, or Kiev, however you pronounce it, many, many places. And it is hopelessly corrupt. It has always been hopelessly corrupt. It will always be hopelessly corrupt. And there are certain aspects of the country. I was there because I was then on the board of a company that was involved in a special type of production of certain types of metal products. And it happens that there is industrial expertise in Ukraine coming out of the Soviet Union days,
right,
particularly in that area, that there's really world-class metallurgical skills still based in Ukraine. And we were trying to tap into some of that in various joint ventures. But the story, and we'll come to that in a second, Jason, on Ukraine, the story in Ukraine vis-a-vis the Clintons goes back to at least 2003. And it's a long story. We're going to tell it today, some of it. But you're absolutely right. Biden's kid had gotten involved with John Kerry's kid in a private equity scheme. Now, the difference between Biden's kid and Kerry's kid was that Kerry's child, or son, or whoever it was, stands to inherit a tremendous amount of money through the father, who married money twice, and as a result, the children are going to be quite wealthy. Whereas in Biden's case, he had spit, he had nothing. He bragged about it in 2015, 16. He was trying to counter Trump, saying, "Look, I don't have any money. I'm so successful, I've got nothing."
But that's not true either. I mean, he's got a pretty big house.
Now he does.
Right. He even said he's got a shotgun there, and you could just go on the front porch and shoot somebody.
That's right. Yeah, while he was devising his plan to put 720 million American women back to work. Yeah, that guy. But this is, I think you jumped ahead. This is John Solomon's piece, is that right?
Oh, I don't know. This was
the
next thing.
Yeah. So Solomon was the one back on April Fool's Day of this year. He, through sources, I guess he was contacted by Ukrainians saying there's a serious problem here. in Ukraine, and it's being efforts to study what was really going on in Ukraine are being stymied by Obama appointments in Kiev and by the Obama-era Justice Department that is trying to cover this up. And when you think about it, here's this guy, forget this kid's personal failings, which are scary. Just forget those for a second. But for Hunter Biden, with zero business experience, zero relevant business experience, at a time when his father was the point person for devising Ukrainian, U.S. and Ukrainian ties, and taking apart the Gordian knot that is America's relationship with Russia, America's relationship with Ukraine. It's not as simple, I like to say, it's not as simple as saying, Ukrainians are good and Americans and Russians are bad and Americans are good or whatever. It's much more complicated than that. There are people in Ukraine who are diabolically evil people, just as there are people like that in the United States. And I'm not only talking about Hillary Clinton. So for the Vice President of the United States, Obama tasks him and says, you're going to be the guy, the dude who's on point on what we do in Ukraine. And suddenly his son gets this fancy contract in Ukraine to be on the board of a natural gas company with no experience, no relevant experience.
Doesn't seem strange at all.
Well, it's just like Barack Obama gets a gigantic movie deal out of Netflix. He's got no experience of that. Or Bill Clinton leaves. I mean, he had experience speaking, but he certainly was never paid prior to being president $700,000 for a speech, or however much money he made for writing a book. It's the same principle. If you want to pay somebody off, you just say, look, Jason, I like your podcasting service. Generally you make X. How would you like to make $1 billion on your next podcast? And you say, well, what would what do I need to do? Well, you have to have a parent who's like Vice President of the United States, right, or President or Prime Minister or whatever. You got to do that. I mean, this is just so far away from being justified. And on top of this, they haven't gotten to the Chinese one. In addition to this screwy deal in Ukraine, Hunter Biden, I think, with Kerry's son, got $1 billion, $1 billion to invest from Chinese, quote, investors, to invest in some project. And there's just no way that people were doing that in China because they valued Hunter Biden's prowess in natural gas or understanding whatever the strategy was of the private. There's just no way. And Ukraine is that you have any investigation they will attempt, as happened under the Clinton presidency and the Obama presidency, anybody who is the target of an investigation in Ukraine is going to do his or her level best to corrupt the process.
Our commenters are reminding us that Hunter Biden was smoking crack.
Yeah, smoking
Sounds
crack.
Like a good guy to give $1 billion.
Yeah, dating his brother's, wife.
So bad.
And then I said I wouldn't bring this up, but I suppose now I have to. I mean, then marrying some South African model, and several weeks later there was a woman in Little Rock, in Arkansas, files a paternity suit against this kid. I mean, the guy is a nutcase.
Wow.
And so I think President Trump, it's not like we have to check with CNN or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or anybody to figure out what the President of the United States wants to do conducting foreign policy. If the President of the United States, who has wide latitude under the Constitution, sees this gaping hole, this gaping, festering set of sores in our relations with Ukraine and Russia, and he's trying to untangle that mess, he has an absolute right to contact his counterpart in Ukraine and say, listen, this stinks. Take this wherever you need to take it. If it touches the former Vice President of the United States, so be it.
Well, it's got his handprints all over it. The other thing that I'm reminded of, Charles, is that Lee Stranahan has done a lot of reporting about this National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. This is something that was set up by the FBI that essentially is a cover for the FBI in Ukraine. So these are the exact same people who have been coming after Trump all along, and he is simply pointing out that a foreign government should be investigating this, and immediately they're all over Trump. This is a huge red flag that there's something extremely important here.
Exactly. I mean, if this were not a government situation, but were a business investment that I was involved with, let's say I made an investment under one set of pretenses, and this, I find that it's very different.
That your billion-dollar guy is smoking crack?
Exactly. You would say, all right, look, we're going to have a meeting on Monday morning. It's going to start at 9:30, and I'd get there at 5:30 in the morning. I'd lock the doors.
What do you mean?
I would lock the doors to the place and make sure that, I decided who went into the building and who didn't go into the building, and I'd have teams of investigators going through any company property to figure out, assuming this is legal, what was really going on at the portfolio company. And by the time that people showed up at 9:30, it would be, you're fired, you're fired, you're fired, maybe you're hired, you stay. And this just reeks. I mean, it's not like we have, in what's left of the FBI, we have people who are just, this person is a Nobel Prize winner, and this person has cured cancer, and we've got person after person after person in our FBI, including McCabe, who was acting director of the FBI, basically mouthing off, going to a Democratic Party fundraiser, and it's all been all over Fox today, saying that Trump should be impeached. I mean, the power that these people have usurped in the deep state, in the FBI, and elsewhere is unconscionable. And Trump really needs to do something soon to fight back here and rebalance the scales of justice and restore confidence in this country, the confidence of you and the confidence of me and the confidence of our viewers and listeners that the FBI is something that you should be willing to trust. I mean, frankly, in the exercise of exposing the Clinton Foundation, that was one of the first questions that I wrestled with. And by February of 2016, my initial idea was that I would put this file together and go down to Washington, D.C., walk in the front door and say, listen, this is a fraud, you got to do something about it. Then I thought, what if, Comey is leading the obstruction of justice? I can't walk in with the answer and give it to him and, have him say, thank you very much, where do you live again? So this Ukraine thing, I think Donald Trump has actually played the Ukraine card very effectively. Mm-hmm. And Shifty Adam Schiff and the others have fallen right into this trap. A friend of ours has pointed out, I didn't have a chance to include a link to this, but there's a woman, a fine journalist called Clarice Feldman, who has a great piece on this, that they've set off a bomb. Who did? The people trying to go after Trump set off a bomb, which is going to end up blowing up Biden.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Charles, just real briefly with regard to Andrew McCabe last night, I don't know if everybody has had a chance to see this, but I just put up a short video explaining to everyone that I was actually in Lancaster, Pennsylvania yesterday with Michael Moore trying to speak to Andrew McCabe at that event, and he went to extraordinary lengths to avoid seeing us. I have a very strong feeling that if Donald Trump was speaking somewhere, I've seen him do it. He just walks out and he says, you, stupid question, next question, you're fake news. So it's like, what is Andrew McCabe afraid of? Why doesn't he just show up there if he has nothing to be afraid of, if he's not guilty as he is about to be charged? He just talk to us and answer the questions.
Well, let's just say hypothetically you've had a long career in the FBI, and including being director of the FBI, and your agency has put a lot of people away in prison. Is there one prison in the United States of America that guy could go to and live safely? I don't think so.
Right.
I mean, so that's probably what he's afraid of.
I think that's called karma, and it is a bit, it stings.
Exactly. So I guess we're on this one then?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I miss one?
The fourth one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has correctly, now this is interesting to me. This story came out on Saturday. It only has 12 shares. I mean, I don't understand somehow how the zero hedge system works. Maybe because it's, it's a warm weekend. It's the last sort of weekend of summer. Maybe people aren't on zero hedge, but
Oh, I was going to say maybe somehow it's run by Google and they're just deleting that.
yeah, that could be as well. But I would expect this to be very much in the news. What's really going on in Ukraine, and it's now the table has been set where a lot of people are going to be asking, what did happen in the Ukraine? And interestingly, Joe Biden, it's not like he has a clear and easy path to the Democrat nomination. They were putting up a slide on, I forget, it was on, I think I had the displeasure of flipping through channels after I finished the slides this morning and watching the tail end of Meet the Press and Face the Nation, that kind of stuff. And they had some people up contrasting the supporters of Biden with the supporters of Warren. And there are two very different camps. But, I think anybody at this stage who, remember, Kamala Harris savaged Biden over the issue of, let's just put it politely, his handsiness. And now we have the corruption issue. And so in Biden, we have a lesser version of Bill Clinton, right?
Well, that's
right?
exactly what I was going to say, is that it's amazing that people make comparatively big deal out of Joe Biden. I mean, granted, he's touching a lot of people inappropriate, but Bill Clinton was a straight rapist, and nobody seems to say anything about that. It's weird how they choose these things to go after people on.
What, now, could it be, Jason, that the people who have burnished the image of, burnished in quotes, the image of the Clintons and Obama and these others are Hollywood types? So they're very happy. They live in a world raping. That's how we roll. I mean, that's what we do.
It's like, not on a weekday.
So, this conservative treehouse, this is Sundance, The Last Refuge. Whoever does this, it may be one person, maybe a group of people, they really do some fantastic work here. But the Ukraine government, apparently, when you get right into it, the Ukraine government is interested to figure out what was really going on here. Because, like, the business model that the Clinton mafia, as it were, academic, media, et cetera, bunch of charity thieves, has followed, is to go into a country that's emerging out of the wilderness, from under the Iron Curtain in the case of the Soviet Union and Central Europe. You go into these countries that don't have legal precedents, don't have justice departments you can trust, don't have any real problem with corruption, and the grifters around these politicians put these deals together where they misprice the assets, the Burisma asset, other assets around the world, and people who fund these political campaigns are placed in a preferred position. I'm thinking here, for example, of Dennis O'Brien with Digicel and Mark Rich and others in the Soviet Union. They're placed into a position where they're able to buy a business that might be worth $4 billion for $500 million. So you'll happily give a politician's PAC $1 million to get a chance to make $3.5 billion. And that's not a tough call if you're a crook.
Well, right.
It's really not. And meanwhile, is it Mike Myers, I think, says, throw me a bone. You'll throw the Clinton family $10 million, one way or another through the Clinton Foundation. Meanwhile, you're making
straight graft.
Yeah, you're making $3.5 billion or more.
Ongoing. Controlling the economy in Haiti, the person-to-person payment system.
Right, and very powerful in Ireland and other places in the South Pacific. So, it seems to be a system. You in addition, the other pockets you can pick is you have the IMF, you have the World Bank, you have all sorts of multilateral aid organizations and big NGOs, and you assert that Ukraine has now been ravaged by the strife with Russia, and next thing you know, IMF gives it a gigantic loan, and so that money goes towards Ukraine and the crooked politicians in Ukraine, and hive off a piece for Hillary and a piece for Bill and a piece for Chelsea and a piece for whoever else they want to give money to. And there's no system yet that is powerful enough to stand up to the IMF, to the World Bank, to these other to the World Health Organization, to the United Nations, and say, listen, you can't do this anymore. We're basically, we've used up other people's money at this point. This is our money. We got too much debt on the global system, and we got to have an accounting here. So the Biden has definitely. I've watched him. He had that Peter Ducey, Steve Ducey's son, asked Biden a question. Of course, Biden, theatrically started doing the, index finger in the face of
wagging.
Yeah.
What could be ruder?
And here's the prosecutor in Ukraine telling Breitbart, which you can say what you want about Breitbart, but I think the scoops that you get out of Breitbart, weeks ahead of what you get out of the mainstream news, which nobody's really watching anymore or reading, certainly not reading. And people have been reaching into the Ukraine, and I got to say, I don't get why Biden thinks it's smart to walk around with these aviator glasses. I mean, he looks like a cockroach. I don't get it.
Keeps his eyeballs from falling out of his head.
I guess that's true.
But, Charles, this is just my opinion, but it strikes me that Ukraine is one of these countries that most people in the United States have no idea what's going on there, where it is. I mean, you talk about France, you talk about England. Most people know that those are countries. Ukraine, I'll tell you, if it wasn't for risk, most people in the United States would have no idea. Everybody calls it the Ukraine.
Oh, it's Ukraine,
yeah. But that's just because I think in Risk it said the Ukraine. And so everyone's like, oh, that's what it is. And I remember my first wife was from Ukraine, and she was always like, why does everybody call it the Ukraine?
Because we play Risk.
It's very strange.
Yeah. So, I mean, here you have people in the government in Ukraine saying, no, definitely Biden tried to stop
That's huge.
me from getting to the bottom of the graft and corruption involving his son.
And now the fake news and the Trump derangement zombies walking around are more upset that we have a president who's actually trying to enforce the law and prevent someone who is involved in serious international corruption to the tune of, you're saying billions or over $1 billion. And they're like, oh, Trump's trying to enforce the law. Impeach him.
Yeah, and dare I bring up the idea that in 15 and 16 and 17 and maybe 18, while president and then afterwards while leading the resistance, Obama and Hillary and the team around them were quite happy to reach out to Remainers in the UK, people who are anti-Brexit,
Right.
in the various spy agencies and the private spy agencies, and whip up this file that they're sharing around the world with the Five Eyes, et cetera, during the campaign, after the campaign. They had no problem with that.
Well, I mean, that's just it. They're trying to, it's a, what's the word I'm looking for? False equivalence?
False flag?
Well,
Yeah.
that, but false equivalence where they're trying to say that what Trump is doing by trying to enforce the law where Biden has actually broken it, they're trying to make some sort of false equivalence with what they've done in spying on him.
I know, it's not close, but I mean,
No.
it's not close.
Not even close.
Now, I don't know if you saw this in the Gateway Pundit, this one, but it turns out that the ambassador who was basically making it difficult to get to the bottom of what was going on, our ambassador in Ukraine, was an Obama holdover.
She put the ass in ambassador.
Right, exactly. And I think around the world we have elements in the State Department. State Department has long believed that they are the premier group in government. They know better than any elected politician. After all, they have a PhD in waffling, whatever they studied in college. And,
Waffling?
Just equivocating.
Is that making waffles? Or right.
Equivocating, being excessively polite and traveling well. And so these people are stuck not only as ambassadors in places like Ukraine, but they're stuck into the consular staffs, they're stuck into the bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. and around the world. And many of these people, some of them are wonderful people, but many of them are not.
Right.
And are married sometimes to grifters who are milking, making money off of their State Department connections and contracts and, investment deals and the like. And there's no Inspector General, of course, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. So it's like, we're going to make some real coin.
We should talk about how that came about and why, like if Trump just eliminated Horowitz or any inspector general, I mean, that would not stop with how much
Right.
coverage that would get.
I know, and it wasn't. it was purposeful. And actually, it started. The Clintons are very clever. W. Bush, the Inspector General in the State Department, left while W. Bush was president, and the position was held open all 4 years that Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. I mean, that's just outrageous. But here we have this creep, and probably maybe there's some redeeming attributes of this person. But if you're going to obstruct an investigation into corruption in Ukraine touching the United States of America, you're a creep. You may well be a criminal. You may well be benefiting from the corruption.
I don't want to get us in trouble along the lines of Roseanne, but is it racist to say this woman looks like Skeletor?
What race is Skeletor?
White, I guess, right?
I don't think so.
Yeah, but she's not looking too good.
Nope. And then we have another person here, the foreign minister of Ukraine, confirmed. And I don't know what Euronews is, but just...
No, we would like to spy on you. I accept.
And here's the foreign minister of Ukraine saying, no, Trump did not put pressure on the leader of Ukraine to do anything improper.
Right. Investigating crime is not improper.
Right.
That's what you're supposed to do.
Right, yeah. Obstructing justice is not what you're supposed to do. I mean, Trump is attempting to obstruct injustice. That's what he's attempting to do.
They won't let him.
Yeah.
This guy has the same, well, it might be spelled differently, but I'm thinking of Aaron Zelinsky, who Dr. Corsi has told us was a member of Robert Mueller's prosecutor team and questioned the doctor relentlessly.
I think it's probably spelled without the I.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think they're related. But an interesting thing, nonetheless.
Yeah, and yeah, so here, this is quite interesting. So this guy, Philip Mudd, is on CNN a lot, and he's a never Trumper. But he was brought on instantly to throw more fuel on the fire that what Trump was doing in Ukraine was impeachable, et cetera. Instead, this Mudd guy jumped all over the idea that it was proper for this person in the national security apparatus to do what he did. Sharply criticized him for doing that. And Cuomo just was not expecting that. And the segment did not end well for Cuomo.
He says, so you don't like that somebody snitched on the president. He's such an idiot, Chris Cuomo.
Yeah, he is.
He should be pushing somebody down the stairs in a bar right now, shouldn't he?
Exactly.
Is that what his big play is?
Yeah. I mean, so the idea is that, again, it's not like the President of the United States is supposed to make sure that every member of his national security team is on board with his policies. That's not the role. It's not. This isn't romper room. It's the President of the United States can have whatever staff he or she decides he or she should have. And these national security people are supposed to provide advice and counsel, but they're supposed to, be like when I was a child, you're seen but not heard at a certain point. You're supposed to be laying back in the weeds. And in this case, it's going to turn out that this, quote, whistleblower didn't really know what actually happened and has stirred up a gigantic tempest in a teapot at a bad time. And we're in tough negotiations with China. We've got the Iranian despots thinking they could blow up the Middle East, and we're just going to say, oh yeah, that's fine. And this guy has now taken a lot of time out of the news cycle, starting on Thursday of last week.
That's exactly what they want.
I know. So this is an interesting piece in Zero Hedge. This Virginia Giuffre is coming out now and saying in a recent interview that apparently Epstein enlisted a whole bunch of doctors and others to dope up these women. And I mean, if that's true, then the various doctors who are involved with this, on the one hand, need to be disciplined, whatever the disciplinary process is.
Lose the license.
Lose the license to practice and maybe go to jail. And again, it's surprising to me this story only has 190 shares.
That's not Virginia Roberts, though.
There's another picture of Virginia Giuffre, victim Virginia Roberts.
Oh, yeah. This is the two of them together.
Yeah. But the point is, it's not only that the medical types should be disciplined and disciplined savagely for this. It's that, you know, all these hoity-toity MIT professors and Harvard people and all this kind. Don't tell me that the president of Harvard and Dershowitz and other people who were flying down to the Epstein Island, going to these parties with all these hot and cold young girls running around a home where the owner of the home has no children, has no wife, no children, no nothing. Don't tell me that President of Harvard, who has a responsibility, the care and feeding of thousands of youngsters. Remember, it's not like when you and I went to college, when 18-year-old you could drink. You can't drink in certain of these places until you're 21. And so there's some tough things happen to 18-year-olds who are drugged and drunk, et cetera. And this is something that the president of Harvard and the president of Yale and MIT and these professors, they should certainly have antennae out in this period, and they should have suspected Epstein long ago. I mean, it's not like Epstein was saying, I'll give Harvard $2 billion. I mean, and Harvard's endowment's, I think, close to $40 billion. I mean, it's not like, I mean, a gift of $30 million is nice, but it shouldn't really move the needle too much for a Harvard. And so why were they falling for it? It reminds me of Madoff. You know, people would say, you know, the only people who gave Madoff money were really smart. How smart can you be if the deal is with Madoff that you have to give him all of your money, and you can't ask any questions?
I mean, it's like, who would do that? Even a dumb person.
6,000 people did it.
There's got to be something else.
Yeah, exactly. It was probably this whole thing. You know, I can't really tell you, but look, I've been in this for 10 years. You know, it's always up. It's always better than the market. There's probably something crooked, but it's a privilege to be involved in this. I put in X. I've now got 10X, and you're going to get a call, Jason, from you're going to get the gift of a lifetime. You're going to get a chance to put all of your money, take it out of the stock market, and put it all with this genius, Bernie Madoff. I mean, most people, and you're not really involved in that world, investing world, instantly you're saying, ixnay.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Sketchy as hell.
Right. 6,000 supposedly smart people gave Bernie Madoff a shitload of money.
But also, if you're rich and you got that way legitimately, wouldn't the second somebody says, well, it might be, it's like, I don't want anything to do with that.
Right.
I have all the money that I need, and the last thing I want to do is go to jail.
Right, exactly.
Makes no sense.
So, in the light moment, I told you, and I've told the audience, that I try to go to the movies, not just out of loyalty to your industry, former industry.
Not my industry anymore.
But and I typically go, there are various movie theaters in the Union Square area, and I'll walk by there. I typically go to the Strand, my favorite bookstore, and I try to find a book.
Next to the movie theater.
Yeah, and I try to buy a book, and the deal I cut with myself is, if I buy a book, I won't go to the movie. But if I can't find a book, maybe I'll go to the movie. So for weeks and weeks and weeks, I've been trying to go to a movie. And every time I get to the damn movie theater, it's like one disgusting bull crap, thing that I'm not going to pay whatever a ticket costs these days. But I am going to go see this movie, and I was very pleased. I almost went last night. I'm very pleased to see that it blew out Brad Pitt's movie first, and then Rambo second. But I mean, Rambo, it's like these, I'm getting older, but I don't go and, take a guitar and put on a sequin jacket and pretend that I'm cool at age 75 as a rock musician. And I don't know how old Sly is.
He's 70-something for sure. I
mean, even if you were not going to go down the path of saying, what are these Rambo movies? They're violent as hell. You're desensitizing the audience to violence. You're profiting from, the very things that the scolds in politics, they want you to give up your guns. Here's Rambo and Sly Stallone out of Hollywood making how much money, basically taking. It's not like these little guns that they're talking. Each gun that he has is,
Well,
bigger
I think
than the
Rambo
next.
became famous by firing a Gatling gun, which is normally mounted on a helicopter. I don't know, this is like the 5th or 6th one. He's 73 this year, so I think, Charles, the blood in Last Blood is in Rambo's stool in this installment of the film. So people can watch that, and I don't know what you can expect, but...
Yeah, I actually, I mean, I know somebody who really does get credit for getting Stallone into the acting business, because Stallone, I think, was from a rich family and went to a boarding school. I'm pretty sure.
I always heard that he was broke as hell, and in order to get Rocky made, he had to sell his dog for $50.
Not so sure that's true.
And he was in porno movies before he was a legitimate actor. I don't know how much money he had, but Rocky was a breakout movie where he insisted on being the actor, and they were like, forget it. And eventually...
It was a good movie.
Rocky won. That film won the Academy Award for Best Original Screenplay, and Stallone wrote it.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, I think I'll have to go back and check. But anyway, I'm glad to see that Downton Abbey did well. I really enjoyed the TV series, and I think Julian Fellowes, the guy behind it, he's already won an Academy Award. He's actually, there was a funny thing. I was as I do on the weekends, in the afternoon. There's not really much on in the late afternoon, so around 6 o'clock, your reruns of Ancient Aliens, and I think I saw earlier that morning, I was flipping around at like 5:30, and I saw 5:40 in the morning, and I saw Christiane Amanpour.
Oh, yeah.
And she was interviewing Fellows about Downton Abbey, and she was trying to turn it into, it's a populist movie, it's a movie for people who, remember when Britain was great, and it's all about making Britain great again, and therefore it's objectionable. And
What?
Julian Fellowes took Amanpour apart. I mean, it was really fit, as the English can do. I mean, he tore her to shreds with a smile on his face.
She's British too, isn't she?
Iranian Brit.
But she has a British accent.
Yeah, of course.
I've never seen the show. It just seems
It's-
like a bunch of British old people hanging out.
What, Downton Abbey?
I don't know what it's about.
No, it's good. It's very interesting. It tells a lot about a time period I don't know much about, 1910 to 1930. It's very interesting.
My immediate impression, just from seeing like pictures or ads of it, was that it was kind of like Faulty Towers, but not funny.
No. It's actually it's quite funny.
Is it a comedy?
It's I don't know. It's
I'm
a drama.
taking you off track here. I'll have to check it out.
No, it is. There's several actors, male and female, who are really brilliant. There's an elderly woman, I forget her name, who's the dowager, and she just cuts people up with a smile on her face. I'm no expert on movies. Far from it. I just enjoy watching them. And anyway, enough on that. So we go back into Ukraine.
Yeah.
Now, the Clinton Foundation's involvement in Ukraine began possibly as early as 2003, but certainly by 2004. Now, let's rip a little bit on the mainstream media. This is a link here to PBS, which everyone says, oh, PBS, it's apolitical, it's marvelous, we should support it. Yeah, right. When was the last time they had one conservative on a PBS show? But anyway, this gets you to a link of an interview with Bill Clinton, and it has a lot of stuff in it. And I and you could read more than I put on the slide, but you can read all the stuff. Most of what he's saying here is just rubbish, absolute rubbish. And if we go back into the slide for a second.
I'd love the first question. How did you first encounter AIDS? Well, I was hanging out in the governor's mansion.
Right. Yeah. But it says, this is a direct quote, he says, the former president, in the PBS summary says, the former president started the Clinton Foundation in 2001, okay, whose HIV/AIDS initiative did this and did that. And this is a transcript of an interview on April 26, 2005. Okay, none of this is true. Bill Clinton was not named as a trustee, a director, or officer of anything connected to the Clinton Foundation until 2009, after September 29th, 2009. As we've gone through in many of the preceding presentations, The original name of this thing was the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation, and it and all the successor names, and down to Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea Clinton Foundation, have never had valid legal authority to do any work outside of, not Arkansas, outside of Little Rock. They weren't supposed to be doing work in Hot Springs when they bought the land in Hot Springs in 2001 as a mini Camp David for the Clinton family and the cronies, and who knows what records are stashed there. So this idea that Bill himself started the Clinton Foundation in 2001 is rubbish. The idea that it had authority to do any international work is rubbish. And then we get to this issue of, why would the FBI and the DOJ and the IRS be so nervous about a real investigation of the Clinton Foundation? Because they had an investigation from February of 2001 till sometime in 2005, and Rosenstein and Comey and Mueller couldn't see the obvious fraud that the Clinton Foundation is. And why is it a fraud? These are a bunch of charity burglars. These are people who get around charities and they say, we're going to stand up and we're going to make the argument, just as we do at the Coon dinner, that you got to send money for the football team. We're going to say, you got to send money for the Little Rock structure. Send us a lot of money. We're not going to tell you how much money it costs. We're going to get a schlock auditing firm to walk in and for years lend their name to fake audit, flawed audit after flawed audit. Is built on a house of cards, or worse, it's built on a house of sewage, these financial statements. They have never actually done the work you're supposed to do as an auditing firm. And so here's this thing, April 26, 2005, Clinton is lying to PBS. PBS is saying, okay, we like your lies. Bill Clinton, we love you.
He lied to Congress. Who cares about PBS?
Exactly, right. And
You've come up with a new term, Charles. The flawed audit is just a flaudit.
Yeah, there you go. How much for a flaudit?
A fraudit or a flaudit?
Right, exactly.
You choose.
Exactly. So this entity that in theory was doing this AIDS work was variously called the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc., the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, the Clinton HIV/AIDS Procurement Consortium, all these different names. None of these
procurement. We're going to procure AIDS.
Procure drugs, actually, to fight AIDS in theory, and procure hookers to. I don't
Right.
know.
It sounds like that's exactly what
Epstein,
Bill is trying to procure.
Epstein, you can imagine he's sitting around a drafting session saying, Bill, I got a suggestion here. Let's call this the Procurement Consortium, and then I'm all in. You can have my plane, townhouse, island, whatever you want. So there is, for those of you new to the show, there is, if you go on the Clinton Foundation website, you punch into Google Clinton Foundation and annual, you will get a link to supposedly all of their audits, which of course, the real audit that was issued, the flawed one that was issued, if you hit this here, and you go down the page to 2000, not further down the page, 2004, if you hit that, you don't get any audit for 2004 because they don't want to show you, just the 990, because they don't want to show you the audit that was issued by BKD on June 30th, 2005, which is a crock of unmentionable. I mean, it's just every aspect of this document is wrong. It even goes so far as to state in the cover letter to the board of the Clinton Foundation, these financial statements are prepared not in accordance with principles that are required in the United States of America. And the Clinton Foundation Board of Trustees says, well, that's perfect. I mean, that's why we hired you. That's why we're going to keep hiring you until you're 2012 when we get rid of you, because you're that crooked. So, and I bring this up to say that this fake audit that was issued on 30 June 2005 was issued after the Clinton Foundation became involved in Ukraine in 2004 illegally. So if we go to the next several pages, these are some key dates that we need to go back over a little bit. Hillary became a senator on the 3rd of January 2001, and why is that important? Other than she did a horrible job as a senator representing my interests in New York, but it's important because laws that govern corruption and public corruption apply to U.S. senators. So the second she became a U.S. senator and the second Bill ostensibly started running this Clinton Foundation, there are and were disclosures that were supposed to be made that were not made. And Bill Clinton then, prior to the 20th of January 2001, is spiriting records out of the White House to Little Rock, beginning in the previous year. But on the 20th of January 2001, he surrenders his law licenses and pays fines for lying under oath in connection with court proceedings. Now, if you are operating a charity, he claims in this PBS interview that he started the Clinton Foundation in 2001. If you're so important that you started something named after yourself, you are in a position to exercise substantial influence and control over the entity. And you therefore, when you file papers around the country and around the world in jurisdictions which ask questions like, has any person in a position to exercise significant control over the entity ever had to disclose that he or she lied under oath and had to surrender a law license? Yeah.
Oh, there is a person who
Yeah,
meets
yeah,
that
that guy.
description.
Yeah,
I think
that's what the big guy does.
Ringing a bell.
Yeah, and so that's what his job is, to fly around the world on Epstein's jet signing memorandums of understanding that are legally unenforceable documents. Anyway, he does this on the 20th of January. He pardons Mark Rich. He leaves the White House, of course, and he leaves the White House in the middle of a shitstorm, basically. It's a gigantic storm created particularly by pardoning Mark Rich.
Well, and also those FLA terrorists who were basically Weather Underground style.
Right. But it was Mark Rich that really, because Mark Rich never returned, I don't believe he ever returned to the United States. He never stood trial personally.
Giuliani was
Giuliani was all over him.
Prosecuted.
Yeah, exactly. So this was a very big deal. And I say that Clinton and others are charity burglars, and they waited 6 days. You know, and obviously the earthquake in India happened, natural forces, but right away, Bill Clinton and this article that Alana Goodman wrote, working with me back in 2015, is absolutely true. The string of felons connected, actual felons at this point, not simply Rajat Gupta, but many other people who were tied into this fraudulent America-India Foundation, which still operates. Bill Clinton was centrally involved in that. We have the papers on the American India Foundation. We have the application for federal tax exemption. It specifically claims that Bill Clinton will be centrally involved in it. And in multiple Clinton Foundation press releases and other, he takes credit for creating this international thing. So he has absolute experience with leading a fraudulent charity in the American India Foundation.
That's
still doing
experience.
it. The same day that they create this American India Foundation, the crooked wives, I would argue, of Rajat Gupta, the McKinsey managing director. And McKinsey is a big deal. It is a gigantic organization that works for powerful people and companies and institutions around the world. This guy was leading it. It was, supposedly, we should all be happy. He's the first person from India to ever lead an organization like this. What a great joy. He then goes to set up the Global Fund, working in league with McKinsey and others. But this guy and another crooked partner of his, their wives, set up this vehicle on the 26th of January 2001 called MindSpirit LLC. And this is the first time we're going to show this link here. If you hit that link, this entity, MindSpirit LLC, does pop up in the Paradise Papers.
Mossack Fonseca.
Yeah.
That just did something.
Paradise Papers, exactly. And so my suspicion is that MindSpirit and other items, other entities like MindSpirit LLC, likely were used as ways to siphon money out of aid projects, to pay off politicians, to derive illegal profits, possibly for insider trading. Highly suspicious, this MindSpirit LLC, that it would be set up on the same day as they decide to move ahead to raise money for the American India Foundation. And again, Rajat Gupta went to prison for insider.
That's amazing. Same day.
Absolutely the same day.
Wow.
Right. So it's a total coincidence, So
right.
We got an earthquake. We're going to raise a lot of money. We're charity burglars. We need to have a vehicle to pass the money around. We've got to set up a vehicle. Let's call it MindSpirit. Why not? So if we go back into this, 3 days after that, this Sandra Thurman, and we have contacted her supposed employer, who had previously been the czar of Bill Clinton's ineffective HIV/AIDS efforts while president. She tries to set up something called the International AIDS Trust, another charity scam. And here Michael Smith has written extensively on this International AIDS Trust. I commend his work to anybody who is not familiar with Michael Smith.
Have we spoken to him lately?
I haven't spoken to him since early January 2018.
Wow.
We need to get him back on.
Yeah.
But
Oh,
that's it, it's the right one.
no, I'm looking at this. Anyway.
Yeah, so this, so she sets up this thing called the International AIDS Trust. At some point in February 2001, the FBI, the IRS, and DOJ do in fact open criminal investigations into Bill and Hillary. She's only been a senator, let's call it 15 January. She's been a senator for 45 days and she's already got another criminal investigation into her behavior. And then in 2001, one link that I'd like to sort of begin to explore more in coming presentations. 2001, McKinsey had been hired by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They decided, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation gave $980,000 to support the creation of this thing called the African First Ladies Alliance Against AIDS. Okay, in 2001, International AIDS Trust total revenue was about $1 million. So 98% of the revenue came from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The research I have performed to date tells me there is no such thing as the International AIDS Trust. It was dissolved in Georgia. It was temporarily registered in Washington, D.C. They've done none of the paperwork carefully. They somehow fell under the aegis of UNAIDS and the UN, but it is not a legitimate U.S. charity. And here, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, in a year where they gave $1 billion away, gave chump change, $980,000 to this idea that you ought to have a slush fund for African first ladies to travel around saying they're fighting AIDS. And so, I mean, it's 18 years ago, and you could argue it's well past the statute of limitations. Well, what was going on in this time period in 2001? What was going on is that the United States, under Bill Clinton, had brought an action, antitrust action, against Microsoft that was settled on the 2nd of November 2001. But that's just the American portion, and it was settled on terms that some argue were excessively lenient to Microsoft.
Yeah, they just made them like take out Internet Explorer and that was it.
Right. And I don't know if money was paid or whatever, but on the other hand, Bill and Microsoft had a lot to worry about in Europe, which had flexed its muscles and also then subsequently brought an action against Microsoft where they did punish Microsoft more. And I bring it up to say, if you're running Microsoft, you're a big shareholder in Microsoft, if you could throw small beer money at the Clintons via their foundation and via things around their foundation in league with, crooked Rajat Gupta and McKinsey, you're happy to do that if you don't have to pay this mega fines or suffer the business disruption that would come from a breakup of Microsoft.
It's a little bit ironic to look at that situation today and see how, yeah, that was a monopoly, but it's nothing compared to the Google and Microsoft didn't have its tentacles into all your information. You could have in 2001 gotten by a lot more easily without a computer than you could now, and nobody had a smartphone going everywhere with GPS and all that.
Right.
Interesting.
And so in a subsequent settlement, on a company called Info USA that was led by this Vinod Gupta, who's one of these eventual, I would argue, near felons. This is from the settlement document. It says, from 2001 to 2005, former President Clinton and his family and other prominent individuals made improper personal use of the company's private jets. Now remember, this is Bill, Hillary, and Chelsea improperly using private jets. Now how many different times does the Clinton family have to do this? They're using Epstein's jet, Burkle's jet, Gupta's jet, who knows who else's jet. The dude has got, Bill Clinton can afford to pay for his own jet at this point. He doesn't need to constantly be grifting from all these people who are very interested in being on the right side of Hillary Clinton if she were to be the President of the United States, become the Secretary of State, et cetera. So the business model here is one long in practice of saying that you're doing everything, you're fighting AIDS, you're fighting earthquakes, you're fighting this, you're fighting that, but you can't do it the way normal people do it or in charity. You say, I really don't think I should burden the charity with the cost of a private jet or first class travel or banquets or sending, people who are really not actually doing anything, to occupy space and appear in pictures, just who happen to be my daughter, or her friends or whatever. I mean, that's not what a real serious charity is supposed to do. You're supposed to pick an exempt purpose, stick to it, and prosecute that exempt purpose using activities where you watch every bean, every penny that goes through that charity to make sure that you're using your resources efficiently. You don't just say, well, I'm supposed to be doing all this work at Little Rock. That's boring. Who wants to be in Little Rock? I was governor there. I don't know enough about Little Rock. I'm heading to New York. Bright lights, big city, fancy restaurants, flashy women. That's what I want. And I want private jets and I want privacy. So I gotta do I gotta roll internationally.
Yeah. Well, why pay for your own private jet when you can grift and get it for free? Did we ever find out, Charles, what the details were of this trading floor that James Patterson alleges was on Epstein's private jet? That seems... Why would he have that? You said he wasn't actually even doing any trades. He was just dealing with Les Wexner.
Yeah, I don't know why he would have that. I mean,
I don't think it's a trading floor. I think it's just sophisticated computer equipment. He tells people it's a trading floor. Could be anything.
Right, exactly. Before you report me for this or that problem, you may wish to watch this video over there.
Exactly. Yeah. Could be live streaming video. Like you made that point that Doug Band was so adamant that they used that 50-year-old short-range, comparatively jet to fly to Africa. Why?
Yeah.
It's very strange.
Yeah, so the point here is that this thing was badly off the rails just as Bill left the White House. And this didn't happen by accident. Doug Band takes credit for being the architect of Bill Clinton's post-presidency. That's like saying, you want to take credit for being the strategist for General Custer. I mean, it's just, this does not hang together as something that you want to brag about. But wait a minute, isn't Doug Band the guy who was the author of the famous Band memo in 2011 where he said, these are the ways in which I broke the law in league with Bill and Hillary Clinton. And Chelsea was sort of a pain in the ass, so she wasn't as much involved in this. But this is how we broke the law.
Didn't she have some specific complaint about Doug Band, like he's hacking their Blackberries or phones?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, this is why I said we gave Chelsea a chance. In theory, she was concerned about how, quote, the good name of the Clinton Foundation, of the Clintons was being brought into the mud by Doug Band and Teneo and the various people around Doug Band who were trying to get Bill Clinton more involved in for-profit activities. So in theory, she was the white queen, riding to the rescue and working in league with people like Eric Braverman to do the right thing. But I think in practice, there's another interpretation, which is either in Schweitzer's book or Daniel Halper's book, about how Chelsea was pissed she wasn't getting enough of a stake. She saw Teneo making a whole bunch of money, and she wanted a big piece of Teneo, is what I heard.
Wow. We could use Band on the Run as a theme for a future show.
Right. Yeah. So just to recap, for people who are going to say, all right, Charles, you're just talking smack, you don't know what you're talking about. Here's a list, here's a link. We don't need to put it up, Jason, but there's a link to the actual application that the Clinton Foundation submitted, and it says the presidential library will be constructed in a city park to be established for the purpose in Little Rock, Arkansas, full stop. So the activities were to be in Little Rock. There's additional verbiage supporting my contention. The IRS swiftly considered this and came back and said, okay, we'll approve that presidential park. But notice, if you change your purposes, your character, your method of operation, you gotta let us know so we can consider the effect. And you gotta let us know of all changes in your name and address. Did they do that? Of course not, right? Of course not. Now, the IRS can't police every charity, so they set up a system that donors have the right and are indeed encouraged to contact a charity before making a donation and say, give us a copy of all correspondence that you've had with the IRS since inception, especially including any questions, if you had an audit, any complaints by the IRS, you've got to give that to a potential donor, or to a member of the public. You don't even have to say that you're a potential donor. And if the charity won't do it, the IRS absolutely must. So people I am aware of contacted the IRS formally, demanded this, and were shut down. The IRS said, no, we're going to obstruct justice on this matter. We're not going to.
Wow.
It's not the people you're thinking of. This happened back in 2016, 17.
I mean, how can they do that?
Well, because the IRS is intent on obstructing justice. That's what they're intent on doing. Because the second this can of worms gets opened up and we see how many charities around the world are being used by burglars who want to stand in front of large flows that go to help earthquakes and tsunamis and other things or other problems, they know that good-hearted Americans and others will send tons of money in small bits and bytes to help the vulnerable, as happened recently in the Bahamas and Puerto Rico, you name it. They know about this, and there are tons and tons of these charities that say they're collecting money to help the needy in far-off lands, and there are not enough people in the IRS to check any of this. And it's costing, in the case of the Clinton Foundation, I would argue it's cost, well, a lot in prestige and financially tens of billions of dollars to the U.S. Treasury.
Wow.
So this just shows in a nutshell that the Clinton Foundation never complied with the law in its early period. To add to that, in New York, Bill Clinton, by 2001, he wasn't going to be doing this in Arkansas. He wanted his headquarters to be up in Harlem. So he was supposed to register by July of 2001 when he started taking money for Clinton Foundation pursuits up in Harlem. He should have registered. And if you hit this is a new link that I found on the New York State website. And it gives you a sense of, why New York is a complicated place to do charity work. On the right-hand side here, these are the various pamphlets that the New York State Attorney General has already published explaining the many different facets of New York State law pertaining to charities. It's much more complicated than in other states. Why? We have very high tax rates in New York State, and so if you allow a charity to come here and the charity complies with New York State law, you're able to get out of your New York State taxes, not simply your corporate income taxes, but if you own property in New York, you don't have to pay property taxes, and there are lots of special rules here. And here, the smartest woman in the world, and Bill Clinton, and the daughter of the two, cannot claim that they don't understand how to read the English language. I mean, they came to New York, they moved to this one mansion in Chappaqua. Last year, I guess in 2016, they bought another one under a theory that next door, because Hillary was going to be president, you need to have
two mansions.
Two mansions, right? Because we're fighting global warming, right? We got two here, we got this gigantic apartment at taxpayer expense.
Two mansions. What's the point in that?
I think
right next to each other. I mean, I could see having one in New York and one in California. Or
one
something.
for Mr. Bill and one for Mrs. Bill, I think, is probably the idea.
That's a good idea.
I know you were not thinking clearly on that one. But anyway, so there are a lot of rules, and the Clintons are like, we don't give a hell about rules. And then on international work, please don't open this link, but here's a link to a dated memo that does explain a lot about how U.S. charities that operate internationally are supposed to work. And, query, why should a charity that says it's going to help the people of Kenya, why should it be entitled to a tax exemption in the United States of America? I mean, it's not entirely clear why that makes any sense. It may make sense under certain circumstances, but a charity based in Little Rock that has no authority to operate outside of Little Rock should not be engaged in any international business of any kind. But if it were in the alternative universe to think it was right to do international work, it would want to check whether it was acting as an agent for a foreign government, because it is bright line law that you are not a charity if you're just acting as an agent for a foreign government. And you would think that a former president of the United States might be aware of the Foreign Agents Registration Act. He might be aware of the fact that his wife was a sitting senator when he started acting as an agent for multiple foreign governments. You would think that he would remember, he's so smart, Rhodes Scholar and all that. He would remember all this.
He's not even aware of what the definition of is, so yeah. I'm not so sure. He knows all that stuff.
Yeah. So as we think through the mess that is the public filings of the Clinton Foundation, and they don't have the luxury of saying, we're a private company and you can't see our stuff. They've already filed multiple fraudulent forms around the world in most states and many countries, and anybody can get them. It's not like you're going to be able to burn all of them, unless that thing that's coming to us from outer space actually hits. There's some big object heading towards us from outer space.
Oh.
And unless that thing it turns out to be a gigantic, I don't know what,
In-N-Out burger
that blows the whole planet to smithereens. But I mean, when you look at this public record, we're now going to show you multiple examples of the Schlickmeister, Bill Clinton, in print on the Clinton Foundation letterhead, taking credit for acting as an agent of a foreign government, which you can't do.
Wow.
Right?
Admitting to it.
Yeah. So before we go there, we want to focus on the difference between Norway and Ukraine. And why we're focusing on that is the government of Norway gave a lot of money to the Clinton Foundation directly and even more indirectly through Unitaid, something we've talked about in the past, including money that went to Ukraine. And so we're going to...
I thought Unitaid gave money to France.
Unitaid, no, France gave money to Unitaid. Norway gave money to Unitaid as well. It's one of the biggest 5 donors. But this is actually the reason to talk about Norway, which comes out of the blue here, is that in the early period, Norway gave money directly to the Clinton Foundation for projects in the Ukraine and other places. Okay, and so the question for Norway is, what kind of diligence did you do, if any, and what kind of records might there be on Norway? You say nobody knows anything about Ukraine, and you're right. We look at the size of Norway, it's 304,000 square kilometers. That's big. Ukraine's almost twice the size. Norway has, by this count, only 5.4 million people. Ukraine has roughly 8 times the number of people. Okay, interestingly, a lot of the African countries, big shares of the African countries don't have electricity. Some countries, like Kenya, I think, has 75% of the country doesn't have electricity or something like that. And it's damn hot in Kenya and damn cold in the high country as well. So heat would be useful.
Refrigeration for food, too.
Could help. A lot of the African countries have only, say, 35% of the countries live in cities. People are scattered across the winds and they don't have much by way of transportation, no electricity, so it's tough to navigate. Ukraine is not like that. I actually traveled around Ukraine by air, but also by, we'll just call it a taxi, but all over the place, hours and hours, hundreds of miles in and around Ukraine.
I thought
the roads
was terrible there.
I didn't mind the food, actually. We had a lot of Indian food, believe it or not, which was pretty good.
I was there in 2003, and
it was probably pretty bad.
Not good.
Yeah, not good.
No.
But you look at the small size of Norway, it's 300,000 square kilometers. It has 95,000 kilometers roadways. Ukraine's twice the size in land area, and it has less than twice in paved roadways. The quality of Ukraine's paved roadways is not good. They are technically paved, but the potholes can be big.
My impression of the place overall is that it was pretty economically depressed, and I was there. I was kind of isolated because I went there with my first wife, and she was meeting with all her friends and family for the first time in a long time. So I was reading a lot of British newspapers, and it was still talking a lot about the effects of people in Ukraine.
Chernobyl.
Well, perestroika.
Uh-oh.
Didn't talk too much about Chernobyl, but how that was a society that had grown up in communism where they were relying on the government for everything, and now that went away, people didn't know what to do.
Yeah, it's still, it's a major league transition, but still in a lot better economic shape than virtually any country in Africa by a long measure. Right. So it doesn't have enough airports. The airports that I've been to, one was striking. There's one called a city called Kharkiv or Kharkov or whatever, and that airport is the airport that during the Soviet Union days housed their long-range intercontinental ballistic fleet, and that airport is huge.
Yeah, a lot of nukes in Ukraine.
Right. So It doesn't have the problem that Africa does of a lot of bad drinking water or bad sanitation, but it does, by some estimates, have a large number of people with HIV/AIDS, 240,000 out of 43 million people. That's, it's a lot.
Wow.
Fair number of AIDS deaths, 6,100 a year. So it does have a credible HIV and AIDS problem that needs attention. And it also has, the population is more religious, certainly more religious than the United States of America. And there's a huge stigma associated with drug use and the types of activity that can lead to HIV and AIDS. And so people, don't get tested, and they spread it more rapidly, and they live in the shadows. They've done a better job of delaying the age at which women give birth to their first child. In a lot of the countries with very rapid growing populations, 17 years old, 18 years old, 9. Here in Ukraine, it's 25. Norway, it's almost 29. They don't have many children in Ukraine. They have only less than 2 per mother. They have look at their healthcare system. They have a tremendous number of hospital beds, more than twice the number of hospital beds that Norway does, a much richer country, per 100,000. And 75% or thereabouts the number of doctors. So it's pretty well covered nominally by hospitals and doctors. And the population growth rate is abysmally low. Right? These numbers would suggest they'd be low.
I remember seeing that I found cigarettes and booze to be remarkably cheap. I wasn't buying either of those things, but I saw it at the supermarket and I was like, wow, that's amazing. Gasoline is super expensive, but cigarettes and booze, stay home and get drunk.
Well, that's how they roll. But now, what people said to me when I was there, and what makes sense, is that Ukraine is a smuggler's paradise.
Why is that?
Because everybody is corruptible. When you land at the airport, they negotiate. If there's a fine, they'll negotiate. You give the cash directly if you're bringing in something that's dutiable, you give the cash to the agent behind the desk, and you ask for a receipt, but you can be damn sure that cash does not go into the bank account of the relevant government agency that in theory is collecting the duties. You talk to students who are going through the university system, and they'll tell you, look, just don't believe the resumes of anybody coming out of Ukraine. They just, they don't pay teachers very much, so the rich in Ukraine just buy, they bribe the teacher and you get whatever grade you want.
Wow. So
the country is very loose, very corruptible. It would make sense for Donald Trump to be pushing the top level, particularly this incoming fellow, who I believe by profession was a comedian.
Oh yeah, right. I heard about that.
Yeah. So you look at Ukraine and you say, now why would the Clintons be interested in doing anything in Ukraine? This is not a desperately poor country. This is not down at 2,000 of GDP per person.
But you're describing the formula. It's easily corrupted.
Right. And if you want to make drugs disappear, and then either create a black market for them across Europe, sell them, or whatever, you want to make anything disappear. You want to traffic children. You want to traffic people. You do it through a place like Ukraine, because you can easily get in and outside of Europe. There are many borders between Ukraine and Europe that are not really policed. And the second you go over those borders, you're inside the EU. And then you can move around. You can move people, you can move goods, you can move lots of things around the EU and then out of the EU. So it's important that people understand this when they think about the context for President Trump saying, look, we have a refugee problem in Europe. We've got many problems in Europe. We've got to get serious about what's going on here. And it's obvious that there is unfinished business involving politicians in the U.S., specifically Joe Biden and his family and others, and Ukraine. And it could well be a gigantic corruption scandal.
Well, it also would, give us a reason as to why they've been so desperate to knock Trump out of the box, because this is exactly what they don't want him to do. This phone call could have been part of a swamp training campaign. Right.
I think it was. It was probably John Solomon's piece struck chords, and President Trump and others said, we're going to do something about this. So here are some, these are actually documents that I have found online in the next page. And what I've done here is I put this in very small type. I'm not going to read it all, Remember, we're redists. Anything that's red is bad. And here's a press release on the 17th of September 2004, issued in Kiev, Ukraine, by the Clinton Foundation. Clinton Foundation had no authority to operate in Ukraine. I would question whether it actually set up an office validly in Ukraine. Now, I'm not going to try to learn charity laws in Ukraine because they're written not in English, they're written in their alphabet, and I'm not going to try to either learn it or find somebody who can read it for me. But just noting, this press release was issued approximately 2 months to the day before the president of the Clinton Foundation knowingly signed a document defrauding the National Archives, stating in part that the Clinton Foundation was duly organized and authorized in every jurisdiction where it was transacting, when of course it wasn't. If it's doing joint ventures, if it's acting for the Minister of Health of Ukraine on September 17th, 2004, it lied to the National Archives in writing 2 months later. This is not an authorized activity. They never told the IRS there was something called the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. There is no record that Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, the entity they tried to form March 24th, 2004, that it ever received a positive determination from the IRS that the Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative could operate. Yet they issue this press release saying they're working, in essence, for the Minister of Health of Ukraine, so they're acting as an agent of a government, and they have the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, and they also have the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative Procurement Consortium. That thing has I've never seen a legal document on that, but according to this press release, there was a partnership, a partnership. Well, you can't have a partnership where there isn't a partnership document. So where is this partnership document? What does it say? Who signed it? Who negotiated it? Over what time frame? What records are there about how much money may have been sent to the Clinton Initiative Procurement Consortium? Where does that entity exist, if anywhere? Where are the bank records that show the ins and outs of monies involved? What companies were paid by the Clinton Initiative Procurement Consortium to buy what products at what prices? And what kickbacks may have gone to people close to any part of this, the government or the Clinton side of things. And here it says the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative was invited to Ukraine by Elena Franchuk, Anti-AIDS Foundation. Now, Elena Franchuk is the daughter of the former president of Ukraine.
Huh.
Now, that doesn't give, maybe in Ukraine it gives you the right to invite people to come to your country and function because, daughter of former president maybe is powerful still in Ukraine. And her husband's a billionaire, and a big donor, Victor Pinchuk, to the Clinton Foundation. But there was no such thing called the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. So when Elena Franchuk, Anti-AIDS Foundation, invited this Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, where's the paperwork on that? Did it comply with Ukraine law? Did it do any diligence on discovering whether, in fact, there was a legal entity called Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative? Because the legal entity that was illegally created was called Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative, Inc. period. There's no Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative, right? And the idea was that they were going to use these connections to get lower prices that, again, they claim the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative negotiated, but it doesn't exist. And that they'd also get cheaper diagnostic test kits.
From Ramboxy for all this?
Some of this.
So it's the same deal again.
Right, exactly. And it is, roll it out. The prices for HIV negotiated by this Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. They claim they've done this in 16 countries by September 17th, 2004.
Was that true? It's like the list of people they've ripped off. Why did you join the club?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? And they signed this memorandum of understanding in Ukraine. I mean, I think while Trump is pestering the leader of Ukraine on the Biden issue, he should also say, look, this Clinton Foundation, tell us what it's been doing in the Ukraine. What records are there? What can you share with us? And this is something we're now getting out of multiple foreign governments and their representatives using the Freedom of Information process in other ways, and its equivalent around the world. So here's somebody called Jennifer Lisfelt, is it? Yeah, who's supposedly the regional manager for Ukraine. We look forward to working with the Ministry of Health and their other partners to combat HIV/AIDS. This is just saying, hey, we're breaking the law over here. We're working for a government, and we're supposed to be only in Ukraine, and we're supposed to only operate in Little Rock. This is, here's a link to the actual press release. So if we go to the next page, again, before they opened the Clinton Foundation Little Rock complex, on October 22nd, 2004, approximately a month before they opened, they brag about this non-existent entity working with the World Health Organization, which through about May 17th or thereabouts was run by Gro Harlem Brundtland, who had been the Prime Minister of Norway. Okay, and so this supposedly Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative had agreed to provide technical assistance on scale, quote, making national HIV/AIDS care and treatment programs more effective in many, many countries around the world. There are many member states of the World Health Organization. But there was no such thing, the Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative. So at the World Health Organization, when Charles Ortiz stands up and says, this charity is a fraud, maybe people will listen to me, maybe they won't. But when the World Health Organization stands up and says, Ranbaxy drugs are great, people say, it's a World Health Organization.
There's no point in looking further.
Right, And so what kind of diligence did the World Health Organization do, if anything, on Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative? It lends its name to this operation, and I would argue it then becomes an enabling co-conspirator in a gigantic international fraud, and proof positive that the status quo cannot be allowed to continue. We've got to be able to discipline people who would do stuff like this. Well, Dr. Jim Kim is at this time director of HIV/AIDS operations, both I think for the Clinton Foundation and for the World Health Organization.
What?
He later becomes president of Dartmouth and then president of the World Bank, and he's the one who resigned suddenly. Yeah.
Wait a minute. Why? It seems like the president of the World Health Organization, you'd want to be a doctor, and the president of the bank or whatever, you'd want to be a banker. Why is this guy having all these jobs?
Well, remember, Dr. Jim Kim is the co-founder of Partners in Health. He's got this absurd resume, where he's a PhD in this and an MD in that, and he's a visionary and a philanthropist, and he and Paul Farmer changed the world and saved the world. And he's one of these people that everybody's saying he's a superstar, right? And then he goes ultimately into Dartmouth. There are serious questions about what happened at Dartmouth when he was president. He goes into the World Bank and unexpectedly steps down before his term is over.
Is that him?
That's him. Yeah.
So that's interesting that he's doing all this stuff.
Yeah, but he's got one of these resumes that's difficult to believe, frankly.
Right.
And anyway, if we just go back into the slide, because I'm mindful of the old tick-tocking.
I just get very intrigued by these individuals who seem to have every huge job in the world.
Yeah, they're stealing our work. So, they brag here about SCHAAA has negotiated prices downwards in October 2003. In October 2003, in prior presentations, we've shown people that the Ranbaxy, the dreadedly evil company, Ranbaxy, Ranbaxy, brags in its 2003 annual report that in October 2003, the William J. Clinton Presidential Foundation agreed to promote the sale of Ranbaxy drugs.
Not allowed.
I mean, you can't do that as a charity, but I mean, you would think that, if you go to your doctor and doctor says, hey, Jason, you really need some Ranbaxy drugs, and the doctor doesn't say, and by the way, I get paid by Ranbaxy for each box that you're going to buy at an inflated price, medicine that doesn't work. I mean, you'd be pretty pissed off, right? And that's exactly what these people have been doing.
But also, isn't Ranbaxy a generic drug manufacturer? Meaning the doctor would say, like, oh, you need penicillin, and you go and then just fill it. They would never say you need drugs from this generic drug manufacturer.
Well, I think they probably would if they were connected to the Clintons. And, here's Ira Magaziner. This is October 22nd, 2004. This press release is issued in New York. There's no Clinton HIV/AIDS initiative in New York. There's no record of that. They've never registered that name in New York. They never had authority to conduct business in New York using that name. Here's a press release issued in New York a month before they defraud the National Archives. Magaziner bragging about what he's doing, while at the same time, the National Archives is careful enough to define the Clinton Foundation as anything that effectively Magaziner, Bill, and other people are doing around the world. And it's documented there. We have it. We've done shows about it. Of course, the agreement with the National Archives is not on the Clinton Foundation website. Of course, we have it. It's a public document. And of course, it shows, beyond doubt, that the president of the Clinton Foundation knowingly defrauded the National Archives, and the trustees have never done anything about it since November 18th, 2004, roughly a month after this New York press release was issued. And you can read it for yourself if you don't believe that it was issued. And then they go on, they brag about how these charity burglars at the Clinton Foundation have done similar deals with the Global Fund, run by Rajat Gupta, World Bank, UNICEF, and others. Okay? So they can't say that they fell off a turnip truck and this just happened accidentally. There's a pattern and practice here of using this slush fund as a way, this loosely, in quotes, controlled slush fund, as a way of attracting money from people who might be well-meaning, who look at it and say, well, the United States, big, powerful country, former president, we like his left-leaning politics, we're a socialist nation. Of course we're going to give him money. I mean, this guy's been the subject of all kinds of investigations. If they had any dirt on the guy, they would have gotten him well before then. Of course we're going to pile in and give money. So what kind of a nation would decide to support this thing in 2004? Seeing, if they did any due diligence, that the Clintons had defrauded their own National Archives. What nation would do that? Well, let's go to the next page.
I think they all just think, everybody else thinks it's good. It's the Clintons.
Well, it's Norway, of all people. So here's a press release issued 3 days before the Clinton Foundation defrauded the National Archives. President Clinton, together with Bondevik, signed a memorandum of understanding on the 15th of November, 2004. President Clinton was not an officer, trustee, had no authority to sign anything in the name of the Clinton Foundation under, Arkansas, even under Arkansas law, no authority to do that. Okay, and evidently Bondevik's like, I'm not going to do diligence. Why would I do that? I just want to get my picture taken with Bill. Besides, maybe he's going to invite me to the opening ceremony 3 days from now. So I can be part of the group that's going to defraud the American National Archives and our Treasury by saying that, we're just a presidential library. Meanwhile, here's this prime minister in New York with Bill Clinton signing a meaningless MOU, talking about doing work in Mozambique and Tanzania with this entity that doesn't exist, Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative. And
Norway is also the place where the Nobel Peace Prize comes from, so they legitimize all these, screwballs,
exactly,
like Barack Obama.
Not just Barack Obama, or Mr. Yunus and Al Gore, Gore, whatever his name is.
They just give it to whoever they want people to think is a legitimate guy, and then they can also recommend people so that people can think that they think that person is legitimate.
I would give a Nobel Peace Prize to Gumby before, some of the people who've got it. I kind of like Gumby. But anyway, in 2002, this claims that President Clinton, again, signed an agreement with the leader of Mozambique and the leader of Tanzania. Well, where are these agreements? Show us these agreements. Show us the board minute that gave you authority, Bill, to do this. How come this isn't in the BKD audit? How come it isn't in the report to the IRS? How come dopey James Comey, who was hot and heavy, supposedly, as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, leading an investigation that had begun February 15th or thereabouts, 2001. How come dopey James Comey didn't say, hey, wait a minute, what the hell is Bill Clinton doing signing an agreement with somebody in Mozambique and somebody else in Tanzania and doing stuff in the Bahamas and the Caribbean? How come, where are the records inside the FBI vault file on the William J. Clinton Foundation of what the agents actually did? Did people in the FBI, were they told, over here is the fraud internationally.
Don't look at that.
Don't look there, right? And over here is the fraud in New York. Don't look at that. You can focus on whether the architecture bill is correct in Little Rock. You could look at that.
Or just go to the human resources department, pick a girlfriend, and start texting her.
Exactly. Screwing multiple people who are not your wives. You know?
Right.
I mean, so anyway, here's yet another memorandum of understanding. Okay, where is this document? You know, how come the Clinton Foundation hasn't disclosed it? Well, we know the answer is it would implicate them. But the government of Norway should have, if there is a memorandum of understanding, the government of Norway should have a document dated around November 15th, 2004. And in my experience now on this, with multiple governments, when they signed these MOUs, there are incredible records in the files that memorialize the beginning, when did the thing start. You know, it's a government, so you've got all these functionaries and bureaucrats justifying their existence.
Right.
It was my idea. No, it was my idea. No, it was his idea. Anyway, and you have all these emails back and forth, and I shaped this memo.
You apply for a driver's license, there's reams of paper.
Right.
This is nothing.
Exactly. Yeah, we got nothing. So, you know, here's Bondevik. He's really impressed by Clinton, and Clinton's really impressed by Bondevik. It's a bromance. At the very end of it, though, it's interesting here. The Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative and the government of Norway are also collaborating, not a great word, in northwest Russia. Now, why would the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative and Norway be operating in Russia? And to people in Russia who may have access to records, what records do you have of Norway and the Clinton HIV/AIDS Initiative doing things together in Russia, and with what counterparties in Russia? Okay, so here we are again. There's 3 examples of the Clinton Foundation bragging about breaking multiple charity laws as they defraud the National Archives and We the People in 2004, and dopey James Comey and Rod Rosenstein and you know, Bob the Drinker Mueller, you know, are hot and heavy. They've been investigating almost 4 years. By November 15th, 2004, your 3 smoking guns come out of the woodwork saying the Clinton Foundation is breaking all manner of charity laws and tens of millions of dollars, if not more. And what do they decide to do? The election has happened. You know, George W. has his 2nd term. We got to give Bill a pass on this. He's got to finance Hillary Clinton's campaign. He hasn't made that much money yet. He's got to keep this Clinton Foundation open with McAuliffe and others so they can raise money to pay for Hillary's senatorial campaign and then her presidential campaign. So if you go to the final page, what we've done here, several years back, we got coaxed out of NORAD, which is the part of Norway that gives away money.
It's confusing that it's the same nickname as the North Atlantic
Right.
Air.
Whatever it's called, yeah.
Yeah.
But this is actually part of the government of Norway. And these are the sums that I have in an email back, an official email back from NORAD saying, this is what we spent from 2007 through 2010. I have data for later years, but I picked 2007 to 2010 because in 2007 and 2008, there very clearly was no Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS Initiative and no Clinton Climate Initiative. Nothing. No legal documents. No legal entities. 2009, when Barack Obama became president, in 2010, they attempted to renegotiate this, restructure this mess, but they did so illegally. They lied to the IRS, of course, in their applications. They procured, via Lois Lerner's department, authority for these new entities to operate on the basis of false and materially misleading applications. And, you know, in this period, you have 4 sets of projects in Tanzania aggregating 72 million Norwegian crowns. In Liberia is an interesting country. We're going to be doing a deep dive on this for my book and in other ways. Liberia is a country that was created by freed slaves, and it's a small country in terms of population. It had endured a brutal period of civil wars or whatever. It only came back into semi-governance, peaceful governance by 2006.
Wow.
So all of a sudden, Norway's doing 36 million Norwegian krona worth of aid into a country that has basically nothing. And, you know, query, what were they really doing? Now, just to the north of Liberia is Sierra Leone, a place where there are a lot of blood diamonds, and there are people trying to get those blood diamonds and market those blood diamonds, and there's no law in Liberia. And so, you know, you can imagine the risks that grifters and grafters and scam artists might insert themselves into these Liberian projects as cover for harvesting these blood diamonds and dealing with terrorists and fomenting mayhem. Highly risky set of things to do. Then they sent 32 million kroner to China. Now, China, between 2007 and 2010, Chinese leadership was acting like, they're not poor. Why did China need aid from Norway in 2007 to 10?
Yeah, that's weird.
And why was the Clinton Foundation doing anything in China in 2007 to 2010? And then they put 10 million crowns into Malawi, 10.3 million pounds into Indonesia. And at the very bottom here, they slipped Ukraine less than $1 million in total, 4.4 million crowns in 2 different projects between 2007 and 2009, HIV/AIDS related, at a time when there was no Clinton Foundation HIV/AIDS initiative. You add it all up, and you're talking about $29 million of Norwegian money that went towards the Clinton Foundation that absolutely does not appear in the Clinton Foundation books. Now, it could be the transfers that were made from Norway to the United States were made at different moments in time during the year. I use the average rate, and so we don't yet know the date of every single invoice and when it was paid, so we'd have to use the prevailing exchange rate on the date that the money crossed hands into the Clinton Foundation. And this would have been a job for who? For BKD. So of course, did BKD do it? Of course not. They're the Department of Overlooking and Enabling International Frauds connected to dynastic political families. I mean, that's their business model.
I like it how most places would have a department for oversight, and they just have a department for overlooking things.
Exactly. So, of course, tongue-in-cheek here, we don't know what BKD actually does. It could be their business model is, tell us the letter you like, and we'll give you that. If you want that letter, it's going to be this price, and we're not going to do any backup work. And if we get into trouble, you have to give us the money to bribe the politicians to get out of trouble.
That's way too complicated. I think they're just getting you tickets to the Mizzou game.
That's right.
It seems to be all they're doing.
But the point here is, and we close this broadcast noting that in Norway, there are a lot of records that are now available. There's actually a good freedom of information law, and people have not yet gotten back into 2007 or 2004. But you could just think of the number of requests that went from the Clinton Foundation entities that would have been a formal report. It probably would have been dated with an address, with a name, with a signature. The request for money, each request for money to Norway is a felony crime because they did not have the authority to perform any of this work. So they misrepresented the Clinton Foundation to the Norwegians that they had authority to do this. So each request for money is a felony crime. Lord help them if it happened over a phone or using the mail.
Well, how else are you going to get to
Could have been in person, in which case it's also bad, because you would have broken probably Norwegian law and certainly New York, Washington, D.C., or Arkansas law. Think of the volume of incriminating information that resides right now in Norway. And this is just one of the donor countries.
Wow.
We already have a large amount from Ireland. I made a request to Australia, which they're honoring. And people around the world who care about the precarious state of the global economy and the high level of debt, when this thing crashes, as it may well do, or at least reverses, people are going to be saying, wait a minute, we want our money back. And the process of, say, Norway asking for the money back, and then Sweden asking for the money back, and Canada, when we get rid of this idiot who's the Prime Minister of Canada, in the coming election, and England after Brexit, and go on and on and on. These various countries are all going to be looking for ways to get money back from these frauds, and they're going to be looking at the deep pockets who enabled these frauds, including folks like Bill Gates and perhaps Warren Buffett and other multi-mega billionaires who've allowed their names to be attached to this escalating series of frauds. Yeah.
So
what's that, the blackface initiative?
Well, what's interesting, Charles, they were describing it as brown face. So it's just so ridiculous how they take every opportunity to just, baby step it, to shift the narrative this way or that. If Trump calls a foreign leader as the president of the United States and says there's some very serious corruption that you need to look into, and the guy doesn't look into it, I think it's pretty reasonable for Trump. They're saying that he urged the guy. Well, if he hasn't looked into it and it's years later, urging might be necessary. But now idiots like Adam Schiff, whose buddy Ed Buck, who I thought was a mega donor, now that he's got a bulletproof vest and he's behind bars, he was a minor donor.
Oh, no, he was a mega donor.
But the New York Times said that he was a small-time donor to the Democratic Party.
The what?
Democratic Party.
No, the New York Times?
Exactly. But that's what I mean. They're just inching it this way or that. This is brown face, according to mainstream news, but it's, Fidel Castro's illegitimate son dressed up like an idiot.
Well, and one wonders who the women are, but in addition to that, but I think in the case of the wokester-in-chief, the Canadian wokester-in-chief, I mean, this is a dude who has been an angry scold since, probably the day he was born, and he's young. I mean, to have done this, let's say, in college in the 60s.
Right.
Is one thing, and it
This was
wasn't good.
2001.
Yeah, it wasn't good, if it happened in the 60s, but it's absurd that this wokester would have, done something like this in 2001.
And then didn't he say that he did it because of his white privilege?
He's absurd.
Yeah. He's a dope.
Yeah. I think he's a foil of people who want that wokester in a position where they can control him.
Right.
And stop the Canadian government from investigating, say, the SNC-Lavalin scandal, which is tied to Trudeau and the Clinton Foundation.
But also, I can't believe how little attention this has been getting. Is this the right one here? Well, there was Trudeau's best friend and his roommate has had his second. This is the guy.
It's a Norwegian name.
A Norwegian name, but he's a Canadian guy who's now been arrested twice for child porn, and he's the best friend of Justin Trudeau. There's been virtually no reporting on this whatsoever. 41 images of child pornography. There's a lot of weird child pornography stuff going on in Vancouver, and this guy Ingvaldson, I don't know, he's so tight with Trudeau. I mean, could you imagine if Donald Trump's best friend, who is Donald Trump's best friend? I don't even really know.
Melania.
Well, I don't know, Charles. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in the world, but I think people were pleased to be brought for a couple of hours into Slick Willie's world and go on the guided Charles Ortel tour. So I want to thank you for that.
So do we have this just in?
Oh, yes,
there's
was.
Good news for people who are concerned about maintaining muscle tone.
Right. Let me see where I had that. Right. So this is from the Astute Research Department.
The Stella Artois Institute.
Do we know who actually can? Drinking alcohol is better for you than exercise. I mean, I think it depends on how much alcohol you drink and how much exercise you do. If you went to the gym and ran on the treadmill until you had a heart attack and died, that might be true. Drinking, a thimble of beer is certainly better for you than that.
It's probably a study done by, who was that guy at Obamacare guy?
George Webb?
No, the other guy.
I don't know.
The MIT professor, Gruber.
Oh, yeah.
It's probably done by Gruber.
Hans Gruber.
Well, this thing, is that how you spell neurology?
I don't know.
I don't know that you'd spell it that way, but yeah, it's not. Clinical neuroscience is over there, Neuro.
Oh, yeah, they got it wrong. Well, yeah. Obviously, they are practicing what they preach. Drinking alcohol is better for you than journalism, according to this person. Oh, Charles, it's a wild world. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the program, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so want to thank everybody for watching. Have a great Sunday. Don't forget to become a sponsor. We're coming up to the end of the month. And the strange thing that happens with Patreon every month is that there's a certain number of people who leave, and then at the beginning of the new month, I'm always like, oh, well, I hope we can get back up to where we were last month. So I need just 2 more people to become Patreon sponsors before the end of September to maintain where it was at the end of August. So if you're watching the show and you're not yet a sponsor, even if it's only $2 a month, there's some people who are on there for $2, some people on there for $100. There's one person at $100 a month, very generous. Don't want to put anybody out, but by having all of these small micro sponsors, $2, $5, $10, it helps keep the undue financial influence of any large sponsor out of the information that we bring you. And for people who want to see this information free on YouTube, they should send crappy messages to Google and not me, because Google are the ones who are preventing this information from being free, because you can't monetize things like this. And Charles, we've been at this for over 2 years now, and unfortunately I have this pesky habit of eating every day.
Why?
I don't know. I want to go into Whole Foods and tell them food should be free.
Of course.
You should be
You're
giving me
entitled
this
to it.
food for free and all that, but they don't go for it. So hopefully people will become sponsors. We got a lot of great programming exclusive to sponsors on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. So I'll see everybody there. Thank you, Charles, for another great presentation. Have a great Sunday.